My name is Kat Min, and I'm 31 years old. If you'd stepped into the ballroom before the music got loud enough to blur intent, you might have called the evening a victory lap. Cut crystal catching chandelier light, champagne poured like persuasion. A curated hush between the string quartet's last note and the DJ's first beat. I stood in a midnight blue gown I'd let a tailor talk me into, hair up in a knot that said, "I belong here." If you didn't look at my hands, short nails, no polish, the kind that always remember work. I'm a structural engineer in San Diego. I design bones for buildings so coastal wind can't argue them into the ocean. Nothing flashy. Load paths, sheer walls, honest math. Lennon used to say he loved that about me. How I spoke about steel like it had feelings and time like it was a kind of mercy you could build into a home. He said stability was sexier than swagger. Maybe that was true once. Lennon had been practicing his smile for this night. He'd rented the tux, picked the cufflinks, and memorized 3 different ways to say, "honored to collaborate," depending on who asked. He liked to call himself a lifestyle creative now. The portfolio we built together in our 2-bedroom walk-up had turned into mood boards, pinned under words like elevation and aesthetic strategy. I tried to keep up the way you keep your footing on a moving walkway that's a little too fast. Image alignment, he told me all week, as if my posture could make or break his ascension. We're meeting Tara tonight. Don't be technical. She hates technical. Tara Reid was the reason the Gala tickets cost $200 a plate and the reason Lennon's voice had started to lilt when he said the word brand. She sells oceanfront fantasies to people who park their cars by mood more than mileage. She has 100,000 followers and the kind of jawline that makes cameras behave. I don't envy people like her. I just don't understand performing your life until it replaces you. We found Tara near the bar, framed in soft light like she paid for it. Lennon's laugh shifted when he saw her, brighter, like a light he only turned on for certain rooms. He touched my elbow, the gentle, stand-back tap you give a tripod. Then he slipped into Tara's orbit. "Lennon," she sang, turning a single syllable into applause. "You came." "Wouldn't miss it," his smile held. "Tara, this is—" "Cat," I supplied, offering a hand. "Engineer," Tara said, as if diagnosing something. "How necessary." There's a way. Some people hear the word engineer and subtract you from the conversation. I've been subtracted before. I usually let it pass. Tonight, I did what Lennon had coached. Smile, be charming, don't talk about drift limits. They pivoted to a coastal build Tara's firm, Horizon Estates, was shaping into an investor deck. I floated at the edge, listening for a place to add value. When Lennon said modular coastal angles, a phrase I knew intimately from a weekend we'd spent on my living room floor with trace paper and takeout, I let myself in. "Your lot sits in a wind tunnel," I said. "If you rotate the primary massing by 14 degrees, you'll reduce lateral loads and—" Tara's gaze flicked over me the way you skim a caption you're not going to read. Lennon's jaw tightened. I went quiet. He leaned in close enough that his aftershave filled the space where an apology might have lived. His whisper was a blade I didn't see coming. "You're embarrassing me. Just pretend we're not together tonight." The words didn't land. They lodged. I blinked at the glass in my hand like it had changed shape. A laugh bubbled up at the wrong time. I set the flute on a linen-draped table, nodded once, the way you nod when a beam takes a load you didn't expect, and walked toward the terrace. San Diego's night air is patient if you let it be. I counted my breath like I do before a big pour. In, out. In, and the string lights blurred. Out, and the music muffled. I should have left. I didn't. I stared at the ocean until it could have been any dark thing, then drove home in a gown that wasn't mine to a desk that always is. The apartment was the kind of quiet that makes you hear what you've been refusing to translate. I opened my laptop to chase distraction. Some shell of a rendering I'd been iterating for a school project across town. A cloud notification pinged. Shared album, client work, updated. We keep a shared account because Lennon said collaboration was trust. I clicked before my better self could close the tab. Videos first. Lennon and Tara on the dance floor, her head thrown back, his hands certain at her waist. A still next, Tara kissing his cheek, while both of them looked straight into the camera like they'd rehearsed it. The caption under a carousel. Power couple energy. A stack of hashtags I didn't recognize, or maybe I refused to. I closed the window, opened it again. There it was, bold as if fonts could be cruel. Power couple. The same phrase that had once made me feel like we were founding something. Now it looked like the logo for a life I hadn't agreed to. I disconnected the shared cloud. I changed the password on my credit card, the one Lennon used for content expenses. I printed 6 months of statements and slid them into a manila folder. I named the folder on my desktop Simply December. It sounded like a candle you'd buy when you're pretending you're fine. When Lennon came home at 7 the next morning, his bow tie was in his pocket and his smile was an old photograph. "Crashed at Matt's," he said. "Didn't want to wake you." "Did you have fun?" I asked, because sometimes the only way through is straight. "Exactly what I needed," he said, and kissed the air near my cheek like we were acquaintances who owed each other politeness. 3 days passed like I was holding my breath. Lennon posted more. Cryptic slides about growth and clearing toxic energy. A carousel on knowing your worth. He didn't mention me. He called it space to a mutual friend. I didn't correct him. I watched his story dots glow and go out, and I cataloged the ache the way I catalog worksite risk. Then irony began its slow knock. My boss assigned me to a new project. Third-party review for a coastal condo development. Luxury. Oceanfront. A client whose brand assets smelled like salt and money. And Horizon Estates. Kickoff meeting, Tuesday. Conference room glass, polished to a morality it had not earned. Tara Reid in a suit that told a story about triumph. Lennon at her side, almost camouflaged by her certainty. At first, Tara didn't place me. Then her eyes lit with recognition the way a lens finds focus. "Oh," she said, "necessary." We shook hands like strangers. Lennon's smile was the same as the Gala's. Thin, practiced. I kept mine professional. The renderings slid across the table, printed on paper thick enough to hide flaws. Except they didn't. Angles, materials, a structural rhythm. I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting on a note you forgot you wrote. Even the mess in Watermark position. Subtly shifted, as if someone had known enough to hide a theft, but not enough to erase it. I flipped pages. You can feel your stomach fall and keep your face. "Looks promising," I heard myself say. "I'll review the documentation." That night, I went spelunking through old drafts. I found the sketches Lennon had asked me for months back. Portfolio practice, he'd called them. So he could pitch a boutique concept with modular coastal living. I'd spent weekends on those lines. We'd eaten pad thai over tracer paper. He'd said, "No one will see these, just for practice." The timestamp said otherwise, so did the metadata. I forwarded copies to my personal email, backed them up, twice. I dropped each file into, say, Simply December, and wrote myself a note. Bones don't lie. Bones. When my phone rang the following afternoon, the number was new. The voice was measured, careful, like someone who reads footnotes before the abstract. "Ms. Tran, this is Blanche Riley Shue. I'm consulting on Horizon's Seascape Residences as third-party review. I need to ask you something off the record." "Go ahead." "The renderings Horizon submitted, did you design them? I found an embedded watermark that resolves to your initials. Hidden, but there." I sat very still. The city outside my office window continued not caring. "Why do you ask?" "Because if you did, and if they were used without license or credit, Horizon will present plagiarized work to an investor next week." I pictured Lennon's hand on Tara's waist, Tara's caption about power couples, the quiet of my apartment when truth comes home. "I did design those concepts," I said steady, "as a favor for someone's practice pitch, not for commercial use." "Do you have documentation? Timestamps, emails, revision notes, the entire trail." Riley's exhale sounded like relief mixed with anger. "Then we have a problem I can help solve. Stay out of it publicly for now. Back up everything. I'll escalate through due diligence." "Understood." After I hung up, I stared at the folder name on my desktop until the letters blurred. Simply December. I almost laughed. Then I didn't. Outside, the sun dropped into the Pacific like it always does, utterly uninterested in our small dramas. Inside, I could feel the building shift, a redistribution of weight. The first brace never looks like much from the street, but you feel it. You always feel it when the structure decides to hold. The morning after Riley's call, I woke before the light had figured out where to land and brewed coffee strong enough to argue with me. My apartment looked like a lab. Printer humming, post-its like small, yellow confessions on the table. The Simply December folder open like a mouth mid-sentence. I don't believe in revenge. I believe in load paths and paper trails. I started with the earliest proof, an email from Lennon last spring, subject line, "Quick favor?" Inside, "Babe, can you sketch a couple of modular coastal forms for a mock pitch? Portfolio practice only. No client yet. Promise. I want to show a vibe." He had attached a photo of a napkin where he'd written vibe twice and underlined it like a plan. I scrolled through my replies. There I was, in polite blue. Here's a first pass. Rotated massing to reduce lateral load, shaded decks for solar gain, timber and steel mix for honesty. Not intended for commercial use. The engineer in me always leaves a caution tape sentence. I saved a PDF of the thread, exported with full headers and timestamps. I dropped it into the folder. Next, the CAD files, each with a UTC timestamp, baked in like bone. I opened one, pulled up the document properties, and hit the magnifier on the watermark layer, the ghosted mark I always place at the extreme lower right, nudged off the page by 3 millimeters, so it vanishes when you export a clean presentation, but survives inside the file's metadata like a fingerprint. I took screenshots, properties panel, timestamp, initials, device ID. I didn't know, when I'd begun doing this years ago, that the habit would feel like foresight. Back then, it felt like superstition, like knocking on wood before a test pour. At 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. I answered. "Tran," a voice said, clipped, male, certain. "Shoo. I have an investor diligence slot at 3:15 tomorrow. I'll embed your documentation in my audit package, with your name masked until legal asks for it. I'll cite third-party verification." I pictured him. Square notes, straight margins, deliberate shoes. What do you need from me? Clean chronology. Work-in-progress files, not just exports. Any evidence the concepts were described as non-commercial. Keep your hands off Slack or text with anyone tied to Horizon. Assume discovery. "Copy," I said. "Riley, what happens if they push back?" "They will," he said. "The right people will read. The right people will notice. Truth is slow and heavy, Ms. Tran, but it has weight." After he hung up, I realized I'd been holding my breath long enough to feel it. I exhaled and wrote a header in a new document. Timeline of design work. Non-commercial concepts. Under it, I listed dates like rungs on a ladder. Email sent, files created, revisions made at Lennon's request. The words I underlined, his request, and every exported slide that bore the shape of what Horizon now claimed was theirs. At 10, I went into the office. The fabric panels in our hallway mute things that buildings shouldn't have to carry. Panic, pride, denial. I kept my eyes on the floor's pinstripes, counting them like I do when a tremor starts and you figure out fast where to stand. "Cat," my boss, Miguel, said from his doorway, "you look like you haven't blinked since Tuesday." "I've been reviewing Horizon's deck." He nodded slowly as if he could hear the sentence I didn't finish. "Careful is better than fast." "Always," I said, and meant it. I spent the day cleanly. That's the only way I can describe it. No text to Lennon, no doom-scrolling Tara's feed. No dramatizing in my head the speech I'd give anyone if I ever wanted to torch a room and walk out smiling. Instead, documentation. I annotated every place the Horizon rendering and my original concept overlapped with a red box. I marked the unique timber steel lattice on the ocean-facing facade, the asymmetry I'd designed to modulate wind load and make the shadow fall like a gesture someone would remember. Why did I remember that I'd designed a shadow to look like a gesture? Because there are moments in design where function and love meet and neither one apologizes. That's why. Around 3, a calendar invite landed from Tara's assistant. Horizon X Seascape. Investor walkthrough. Also, final prep. 5:30 p.m. Conference 4B. Optional for me. Optional is a kind word for expendable if you insist on bringing reality to the party. I went anyway. Conference 4B felt colder somehow. though the thermostat said 72. Tara's team occupied one side of the table like a photograph you weren't invited to be in. Lennon took a chair that gave him a line of sight to both Tara's reflection in the glass and mine. He didn't look my way. Tara clicked the remote and built a world out of slides. You can admire the rhythm, even if the song isn't yours. She was good. God, she was good. Turning render to narrative, trajectory to inevitability. She used phrases like lifestyle intelligence and shoreline curation without blinking. Our technical review appeared as a single bullet point near the end. Third-party diligence in progress. I imagined Riley somewhere, assembling his quiet knives. When it ended, Tara smiled the way people do after a perfect dinner they didn't cook. Questions? She asked the room, but really, she asked herself. I raised my hand. The move felt both naive and brave. On slide 23, I said, keeping my voice calm, the coastal aperture sequence. What's your planned mitigation for accelerated salt corrosion given the lattice spacing? A muscle near Tara's temple twitched. She recovered instantly. Vendor is advising ceramic coat, elevated grade. Wrong vendor, Lennon said, smooth, as if he'd placed a card exactly where he'd planned to. We're in talks now, right, T? The room waited. Tara didn't glance at him. We'll confirm, she said. Her smile widened a degree. Any other necessary notes? She meant know your role. I'll send a memo, I said, and closed my notebook. He caught me in the hall after. There are always places in a building where the air stops moving. We found one. Cat. He said my name the way someone says a code they don't believe in anymore. You didn't have to come. Optional was an interesting choice of word. He rubbed his jaw. Tara needs clean air right now. Clean air doesn't usually come from closed windows. He stepped closer, performing tenderness, the way he performed casual. From this distance, I could count the threads in his tie, the ones I had straightened for a different man at a different time. We're under a microscope, he said, lowering his voice. If you want to help, just don't make it about, His eyes flicked, just once, toward the general vicinity of my heart. About truth? I asked. About us, he snapped, then gentled it immediately, like he'd pinched a child. Look, you and I, we're complicated, but this is a good thing for me, for us. There it was again. Us as brand, not body. Us as leverage. Good things don't need to steal names, I said, and they don't need me to be invisible to exist. He opened his mouth, closed it, then found the line he'd rehearsed. You're being dramatic. I wanted to laugh, so I didn't. I'm being documented, I said. There's a difference. I walked away before he could try to make my spine his prop. That night, Tara DM'd me from her professional account. One line. Let's keep this professional, yes? We all benefit when the story is clean. I stared at it until the urge to type out a lecture on the phases of failure passed. I archived the message, screenshotted it, placed it gently inside Simply December, and closed the lid on my laptop like I was tucking in a child who had finally stopped asking why. Riley called at 9:40. Package submitted, he said. You'll get a ping if legal needs you. Otherwise, stand back. How bad will it be? For whom? He let the question sit. Investors don't like surprises that look like patterns. Horizon has a reputation for speed. Speed is a cousin to sloppiness. I said nothing. He filled the quiet with something that sounded almost like care. Get some sleep, Ms. Tran. Sleep arrived like a guest who came late and left early. I dreamed of stairwells, of holding a beam while the person beside me filmed my hands and posted the video with a filter that made the concrete look prettier than it could afford to be. In the morning, I did the only thing that makes sense when the ground under you is deciding whether to be shore or sea. I went to work. I wrote the corrosion memo Tara didn't want but would need, and I copied Miguel and our legal. I filed my chronology into a private drive we reserve for things that might become court. At 2:58 p.m., my phone lit with a calendar notification. Investor diligence, 3:15. I wasn't invited. That wasn't the point. I stood by the window with a paper cup of coffee gone cool and watched a strip of ocean where the whitewater cut the blue like handwriting across a page. If you do this kind of work long enough, you learn the sound of a structure deciding. It's not a bang, it's a subtle shift, a quiet, patient redistribution. Something yields, something else holds. People call it luck from the street. Up close, you can feel the math become mercy. At 3:12, a text from Riley. Going in. At 3:36, nothing. At 4:01, still nothing. At 4:27, a single message. Read receipts are a kind of poetry. Sit tight. I laughed, sharp, surprised. It felt like air finding a room it forgot. At 5:02, Miguel appeared in my doorway and leaned against the jamb like a man who's seen a few buildings survive and a few fall. "You're not pacing," he said. "I'm proud." "It helps to pretend I'm calm. Engineers call that bracing," he said. "People call it grace." My screen stayed mute. My folder stayed full. My pulse stayed a small, manageable animal in my throat. At 6:11, my phone buzzed on the desk, face down. I didn't pick it up right away. I let the sound pass through me and out the open window. Then I turned the phone over and read the preview without touching it. From Riley, "You documented well. More soon." I exhaled in a way that left the room different. I packed my bag, turned off my lamp, and walked through the office where the emergency exit signs glow a steady green, promising a way out you rarely need, but always check mentally on your first day. Outside, the air had cooled. I stood on the sidewalk and felt the city's weight without being crushed by it. "Truth is slow and heavy," he'd said. He was right. It doesn't sprint. It leans. And when it leans long enough, in the right place, even the prettiest facade has to admit what's holding it up, and what never did. The email from Riley came 2 days later. No subject line, just a PDF attachment and a single sentence. "Due diligence completed. Horizons investor has withdrawn." That was it. 12 words to end a company's projection and begin an avalanche. By noon, whispers ran through every architecture Slack I followed. Horizon pulled from Seascape. Plagiarism flagged in their concept deck. Metadata traced to outside designer. The forums lit up with side-by-side screenshots comparing renders. The originals from my old Behance archive and Horizon's new presentation. Even the Watermark's ghost edge appeared in someone's zoomed-in tweet. By 4 p.m., Tara's LinkedIn post went live. Disappointed to see an internal vendor violate trust during a major project proposal. We stand for integrity and creativity. No names, but she'd tagged Lennon. That evening, I walked to the pier and watched pelicans dive through gold light until the sky stopped looking expensive. My phone vibrated once, twice, then nonstop. Lennon. Lennon. "You started this." Lennon. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Lennon. "Tara's blaming me. The investor's gone." "My reputation." I muted the thread. The next text that came through wasn't from him. "Riley, you may get some noise. Legal has your documentation if needed. You did the right thing." I stared at the message for a long time. The words "did the right thing" heavier than comfort. 3 days later, Lennon came home early. No warning. The door opened, and he was suddenly there. Creased suit, jaw clenched, holding the silence like it was evidence. "Kat," he said, voice flat. "Did you talk to anyone?" "About what?" He threw his keys on the counter, metal against marble. "Don't start. Tara's team traced those files back to your IP. You could have..." "I could have what?" "Let it go." His voice cracked into something feral. "We were finally making something big. Why sabotage it?" "I didn't sabotage anything," I said evenly. "I protected my work." "You think this helps you? You made me look like a thief." I stepped closer. "You are a thief, Lennon. You stole my designs. You just didn't expect anyone to notice because it didn't fit your feed." He flinched. "Tara said you'd say that. Said you always wanted to pull me down." "That's projection, not prophecy," I said. "I don't need to pull you down, Lennon. You're collapsing fine on your own." He stared at me, realization flickering, rage chasing it. Then he laughed, a thin, nervous sound. "You always loved playing the victim. Maybe now you finally have an audience." "No," I said, "just documentation." He turned, grabbed his duffel, and left. The sound of the door clicking shut was quieter than I expected, like the end of a breath you didn't know you'd been holding for 5 years. The apartment exhaled around me. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, a siren bent into the distance. I sat on the couch and waited for the kind of grief that feels cinematic. It didn't come, just calm, like when a structure finally stops swaying after a quake. 2 days later, Lennon posted. A black background, white serif font. "Betrayal comes from those closest to you. Small minds ruin big visions." Below it, heart emojis, sympathy comments, messages of solidarity. His followers framed him as the misunderstood visionary. A few of our mutual friends reposted it with broken heart gifs. I let it scroll past, feeling nothing except mild curiosity at how predictable patterns always looked brand new to their authors. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Tran? Yes. This is Elias Vance from Horizons Legal. We've confirmed your authorship. We'll send acknowledgement paperwork for your records. Thank you for your professionalism. Of course, I said, because engineers know how to sound calm in aftershocks. Before he hung up, he added, almost kindly, between us, you just saved a lot of people from a lawsuit they didn't see coming. I smiled faintly. I've always been good at noticing cracks. The next week was an odd mix of emptiness and noise. My inbox flooded with internal congratulations disguised as caution. Miguel sent a message that simply said, proud of how you handled that storm. Meanwhile, Lennon's online universe shifted. Tara unfollowed him first. Then sponsors pulled back, partnerships paused, his posts drowned in vague spiritual captions about reinvention. The irony didn't need me to spell it out. I didn't post anything, didn't explain. I let absence do the talking. 2 weeks later, Olivia called. Hi, Kat, it's Olivia, Lennon's sister. Her voice carried a tremor of apology and caffeine. Hi, everything okay? She hesitated. I read some of the online stuff. I know what he did. Honestly, I've known versions of it for a while. He's not great at keeping patterns hidden. I waited. I'm doing my journalism thesis, she continued, on social media narcissism, how curated identity becomes emotional currency. I'd like to use his situation as a case study. Yours too, but anonymized. I blinked. You want to write about this? Not the gossip, the psychology. How people start performing relationships for validation until they don't know what's real anymore. Her words cut cleaner than any insult Lennon ever threw. She added softly, he's telling our parents you sabotaged him out of jealousy. I want truth in print somewhere, even if it's masked. I exhaled through a tired smile. Use it. All of it. Just one condition. Don't frame it as revenge. Frame it as pattern recognition. You sure? Yes, I said. Some truths don't need my name. They just need oxygen. A month later, her piece went live on an academic journal site. The Age of Curated Love. I read it on a Saturday morning, sunlight pooling across my coffee table like approval. She wrote about how relationships become branding assets, how authenticity turns into performance, and how manipulation hides behind the language of growth and alignment. She didn't name Lennon, but anyone who'd been orbiting him online could see the silhouette. The essay made its quiet rounds. Medium reposts, think pieces, shares among design circles. Comments flooded in. People describing partners who had broadcast their relationships like marketing campaigns, others who recognized themselves in the urge to curate. It wasn't viral, it was awake. 3 days later, Lennon found out. I was leaving the office, dusk pressing the skyline flat, when I saw him waiting near my car. Same navy coat, same hollowed eyes. You ruined me, he said before I even spoke. His voice cracked under the weight of self-pity. Do you know what this did to me? Define this, I said. That article, everyone knows it's about me. It doesn't use your name. They don't need it. His hands trembled. You and Olivia humiliated me. I took a breath. No, Lennon, you humiliated yourself. We just stopped cleaning up after it. He blinked, stunned by the lack of sympathy. I loved you, he said, voice shrinking. No, I replied quietly. You loved how I looked standing next to you. The stability, the practicality. I was part of your aesthetic, not your life. Tears smudged his perfectly rehearsed exhaustion. You don't have to be cruel. I'm not, I said. Cruel would be pretending you're still someone worth performing for. He looked at me for a long time. Some mix of grief, disbelief, and the dawning understanding that there were no more mirrors left to project onto. Then he sat down on the curb beside my car and cried. Real crying, unfiltered. I stood there, feeling the faint ache of something ending. Not triumph, not sorrow, just release. After a minute, I said, Lennon, you'll survive this. You just might not recognize who you are when you do. I got into my car, started the engine, and left him there under a streetlight that flickered like a camera flash running out of battery. That night, I didn't check social media. I deleted the apps instead. For the first time in years, my phone screen was still. And in the quiet, I realized silence wasn't empty. It was proof of life returning. It's strange what becomes noise once you've learned the shape of silence. A year ago, my nights were measured in notifications and arguments staged over dinner plates. Now, the only sound that fills my apartment is the soft click of my keyboard and the hum of the fridge that never seems to tire of working. It's been 6 months since Lennon's last message, some half-hearted apology disguised as self-discovery. He's in therapy now, or at least that's what Olivia told me when we met for coffee 2 weeks ago. She looked older in the way truth ages people, eyes clearer, shoulders lighter. He's living back with my parents, she said. No more brand partnerships, no more followers, just Lennon. I smiled softly. Maybe that's what he needed. Just Lennon. She nodded. The irony is, your story, our story, got picked up by Design Ethic, then Modern Psychology Quarterly. My professor called it one of the most honest dissections of curated intimacy he's read. You wrote it honestly, I said. I wrote it the way it happened. I didn't tell her how reading the essay had felt like therapy conducted through mirror glass, how every paragraph stripped me of old shame I didn't know I was still holding. She didn't need to know that sometimes I still woke up to phantom echoes of Lennon's voice, soft, rehearsed, convincing, and had to remind myself that I was no longer anyone's prop. Before she left, Olivia handed me a print copy of the article. On the dedication page, in quiet serif letters, it read, "For Kay, the woman who chose truth over performance." I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead I felt a steadiness that could only come from knowing the storm had already happened and the house was still standing. 3 weeks later, I stood outside my firm's headquarters holding a manila envelope I hadn't expected to receive. Promotion letter. Project lead. Miguel had slipped it across my desk that morning. "You earned it," he'd said, "and no one can say otherwise." For a woman once accused of being embarrassing, integrity had turned out to be excellent PR. That night, I celebrated alone the way engineers do, by rearranging blueprints and pretending the bubbles in my cheap champagne were applause. At 8:43 p.m., my phone buzzed. Riley. Riley? Heard about the promotion. Congratulations, Kat. Me. Thank you. You're partly to blame. Riley. Only partly? I was hoping for at least 60%, me. We'll negotiate after the next audit. I smiled at my own reflection in the dark window. I hadn't realized I'd missed smiling for no reason. When we finally met again, it wasn't planned. He was in town for a structural compliance review, and Miguel, unaware of our history, assigned me as his liaison. He arrived early to the site office, coffee in hand, calm as always. "Ms. Tran," he said, mock formal. "Still documenting everything, I hope?" "Every screw," I replied. We fell into the easy rhythm of professionals who've shared a battlefield. Lunch turned into an after-work drink, which turned into a conversation that stretched past midnight. Riley wasn't like Lennon. He didn't sell ambition in filtered sentences. He listened. He noticed. When I spoke about the ethics of design credit, he didn't interrupt with advice. He asked follow-up questions. When I said silence had become my favorite sound, he said, "That's how you know you've built something stable. It doesn't need to shout to stand." By the time he walked me to my car, I realized something quietly terrifying. I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. A month later, I accepted a job transfer. Bend, Oregon. Population small, sky enormous. My new project, sustainable housing for local families, modular, efficient, honest. Buildings meant to serve people, not personas. The first morning there, I stood on the construction site with frost still clinging to the scaffolding and thought, this is what a clean slate feels like. Riley visited 2 weeks after the move. He showed up with hiking boots and a grin. "Couldn't stay away from my favorite documentation expert," he said. We had lunch by the river. Conversation drifted like the current, unforced, unfiltered. When he asked how I was adjusting, I said, "I'm finally in a place where no one performs. They just build." "Maybe that's why you belong here," he said. One afternoon, months later, he called me while I was reviewing site plans. "Riley, you busy?" "Me. Always." "Why, Riley?" "You need to see something. Meet me downtown." I found him standing on the corner of Greenwood and Wall, pointing across the street. It was a billboard, sun-faded and half-torn, a remnant from Horizon Estates' last campaign. The original slogan had read, "Building Lifestyles." Now the wind and weather had peeled it into something truer. "Building Lies." We both stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. Not bitterly, just with the absurd relief of someone who has finally watched justice grow old enough to look poetic. Riley smiled. "The universe has an editor's sense of humor." "Maybe it's just good typography," I said. That evening, we sat by the river again. No pretense, no filters, just the low hum of water and the steady rhythm of two people who didn't need to narrate themselves. "I like this version of you," he said finally. "What version is that?" the one that stopped pretending survival had to look performative. I looked at the reflection of the fading billboard in the water and felt the last shard of the past dissolve. Then I think I'll keep her, I said. Later that night, back in my apartment, I poured the last of the champagne from my promotion day into a glass. It had gone flat, but it tasted real. My phone buzzed once, a message from Olivia. He's doing better. Lennon's therapy is sticking. He's off social media, no followers, no brand. Just him. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at the text for a while, then typed back. Good. Tell him the world doesn't need another performance. It needs foundations that hold. I deleted my social media accounts that weekend. Not out of bitterness, out of relief. I no longer needed proof of existence. There's a quiet freedom in living a life that doesn't need to be photographed to be believed. 1 year. That's how long it took for the noise to fade into something that sounds like peace. I measure time differently now, not in milestones or metrics, but in mornings, in how early the light finds my desk, in how the coffee cools slower when I'm not rushing anywhere, in how silence no longer means absence, just room. My name is still Kat Min Tran, but these days I introduce myself differently. When people ask what I do, I say, I build things that last. No one ever asks if that includes myself. I like that. It's late autumn in Bend, and the leaves outside my office window look like they're trying to remember every shade of fire before winter tells them to rest. Our project is nearly done. 27 sustainable homes, clean lines, affordable warmth. Families have started moving in. Watching them carry boxes across the dirt paths we carved months ago feels like watching permanence get born. Riley walks into my office mid-afternoon with 2 steaming cups. You're forgetting to eat again, he says. I'm an engineer, I say. We feed on deadlines. He smirks. Coffee isn't lunch. Coffee is therapy, I counter, taking the cup anyway. He leans against my drafting table, scanning the latest structural review. Everything passes. It should. I stopped cutting corners a long time ago. He glances up. You never did. We don't talk about before much. It's not avoidance. It's gratitude disguised as restraint. He knows the story. He was in it for the hardest chapters. He just doesn't make me reread them. Sometimes I think that's what real healing looks like. Finding someone who doesn't need your pain to validate your worth. That weekend, he takes me hiking. No phones, no playlists, just trail dust and our laughter echoing off the basalt cliffs. Halfway up, the view opens. The town below, the river like a silver thread, and in the far distance, the faint outline of the billboard we once stood beneath, the one that now reads Building Lies. Time has weathered it further. The last few letters are nearly gone. Soon, it will just say, building. I point. Maybe that's better. Riley shades his eyes. Maybe that's all that ever mattered. We sit on a rock, eating trail mix and watching clouds rearrange themselves without needing approval. You ever think about her? He asks quietly. Lennon? He nods. Sometimes, I admit. Not with anger, though. More like remembering an old draft. Useful for what it taught me, but not something I'd ever build from again. He smiles, that quiet kind. You're good at metaphors. I'm good at rebuilding, I say. We don't speak for a while after that. The silence feels earned. That night, after he drops me home, I find an old USB drive buried in my desk drawer. The label reads, Concept Deck, Lennon/Practice Pitch. I plug it in. Inside, the early renders, the ones he called portfolio pieces. My watermark in the corner, faded but there. For a second, I almost delete them. Then I don't. Instead, I open the file, zoom into the signature curve of the latticework, the line that started it all, and I realize something small but profound. I don't feel anger anymore, I feel authorship. The designs are still mine, but so is the piece that came after. I rename the file, Foundations Final. Then I close it and never open it again. A few weeks later, Olivia sends me an email. Subject line, new publication. She's turned her thesis into a book. Expanded interviews, follow-up research, a chapter on professional ethics in the age of image. The dedication page has changed. For those who stopped performing long enough to tell the truth. Below it, a single line of acknowledgement. Special thanks to KMT, who reminded me that silence can be a form of courage. I close my laptop and stare at the ceiling for a long moment, letting the words settle where guilt used to live. On the day our final build passes inspection, the crew signs their names on a beam before it's sealed behind drywall. Riley hands me the marker last. Your turn, he says. I write integrity holds. He reads it, nods. Poetic. Accurate, I reply. We laugh, and for the first time in years, the sound doesn't echo, it anchors. That evening, we drive out to Crater Lake like we promised months ago. No phones, just a paper map and too much trail mix. The lake stretches below us, blue so deep it feels like time itself could drown in it. Riley points at the horizon. You know, some people would post this. Then it would stop being real, I say. He grins. You really did delete all your socials? Every last one. How do people know you exist? They don't, I say, and that's the point. He laughs softly, pulling me close. Pretend we're not coworkers today, he murmurs, echoing the old line with a gentleness that undoes me. I smile against his shoulder. Deal. Except this time, it isn't pretending. Later, as the sky turns violet, I think about how everything in my life once revolved around being seen. Now, it revolves around being real. Lennon taught me about performance. Olivia taught me about narrative. Riley taught me about stillness. And somewhere between the three of them, I learned about myself. When we drive back to town, the billboard catches the last of the sunset. The wind has stripped away the final letters. Now it reads only one word: building. It makes me laugh, a full, unguarded laugh that feels like construction, not collapse. Because that's all I've ever done, all I'll ever need to do. Build, hold, stay.